Hello, my name is Stephen Hymans. I'm currently a postdoctoral research fellow at Griffith University in Australia. Today I'm going to be talking about the article Doing Education Policy Enactment Research in a Minor Key, co-written with Paolo Singh, who's a Professor of Education at Griffith University, and Kath Glaswell, who's an Associate Professor at California State University. This article arises out of the last stages of an Australian Research Council linkage funded research project called Smart Education Partnerships, testing a research collaboration model to build literacy innovations in low socioeconomic schools. This project was a design research collaboration that developed and tested a set of practices for enhancing literacy outcomes in schools situated in high poverty contexts. The final stages of the research from which this article arose occurred just after the research collaboration work was completed. It involved investigating the changed schooling practices in terms of sustainability and how the school workers thought about and responded to this kind of school-university partnership research and the education policy environment that they are doing their work in. The project built on the successful research that Kath Glaswell, whose discipline area is educational psychology and reading improvement, had undertaken on similar collaborative projects in New Zealand and the United States, and meetings that Paolo Singh had in her role as head of school at Griffith University with colleagues, including school principals and the school's district regional administrators, who were responsible for staffing schools in high poverty areas that were struggling with the low performance of students in the high stakes testing regime of NAPLAN, and especially the effects on the schools of the ways that this was being reported in the local papers. How could teachers be supported during this time? They were constantly under attack and criticised in the local press. Morale in the schools was low, and teachers felt that despite their efforts, they couldn't always make a significant difference to the learning outcomes of students enrolled in the schools in high poverty communities. The question arose for Paolo, whose disciplinary area is sociology of education, building on the work of Basil Bernstein, was it enough to sit on the sidelines as a researcher and critique the effects of NAPLAN? Clearly her answer, and Kath's as well, was no. This question gets directly into the distinctions between school improvement research on one hand and critical education scholarship on the other, between research about direct change and research that generates ideas that have effects over longer timescales and in less direct ways, perhaps affecting assumptive worlds of decision makers, as Bob Lingard has put it. This space between these two different kinds of research was important when we conducted the final stage of the research. The research team was often confronted by the complexity of the school and the community environments and how the research interventions had influenced the schooling practices. So, given this complexity, we were interested in exploring the spaces between these different kinds of research and the intersections that these had with our thinking about education policy enactment. Stephen Ball and colleagues in the education policy field have offered theorisations of enactment that focus on the contradictoriness and contingency of policies as they play out in education institutions. This is in contrast to a focus on policy implementation research that implies a certain ideational linearity and possible fidelity between policy derivation and production and educational practices. We contribute to this thinking in another article where we talked about the ontological possibilities for enactment research. This is where doing becomes important. The focus is on research and emergent realities, drawing especially on the work of John Law. Here, we don't pursue this line further, but instead contest the power of enactment theory that defines in advance the problems and concepts that we might work with and the methodologies we might use by conceptualising enactment research in a minor key mode. This helps us to begin to problematise the possibilities of our education research providing either seemingly neat and straightforward solutions to intractable problems and/or revealing the conditions of others through investigation. This minor key mode develops from Isabel Stenger's work, who's a philosopher of science with a background in chemistry. Stengers draws on process philosophy, especially that of Alfred North Whitehead and Gilles Deleuze. The work we use is from her 2005 Introductory Notes on an Ecology of Practices, published in Cultural Studies Review. It is worth hearing some of her words directly. She says, "What is at stake here is giving to the situation the power to make us think, knowing that this power is always a virtual one, that it has to be actualized. The relevant tools for thinking are then the ones that address and actualize this power of the situation, that make it a matter of particular concern. In other words, make us think and not recognize." So one of the tasks we set ourselves was to try to give to the situation of the research the power to make us think, not to recognize. So not to look for and see things based on what we already know, not to use our current categories of thought for thinking, not to hold our assumptions and presuppositions too easily and dearly, and to try to work in complex and contradictory ways. The result is that we have proposed what Brian Masumi calls a minor concept to work with, responsibility, and to do this work in a minor key, disturbing the tranquility of theoretical, methodological findings, set pieces. This is the beginning of our thinking, of being able to think by giving the situations the power to make us do this. For us, this is an ongoing task, and one that surely slows thinking down as well, makes our machines of rationality more difficult to keep spinning too easily. I hope you enjoy the article and find in it some things that are unexpectedly generative. Thanks very much for your time.